matter how far away the goal is, the only way to get there is by putting one foot in front of another every day. Given time, there is no problem that's insurmountable.
I am curious about mentors.
I think everyone actually has a really interesting story and something they can teach. 4 qualities that you can't really train. And that's work ethic, taste, integrity, and curiosity. One of the most sacred things we can do is hiring someone. I think it's really important to stay involved with hiring. There's a lifetime of your company. I personally did the final interview for the first 1,000 hires.
Why should all companies have a creed?
I think people need something to believe in.
You've written that everybody should have a creed, like a company creed. And I was rereading as the company creed of Automattic, which essentially starts with, I won't read the whole thing, but it starts with, I will never stop learning. I won't just work on things that are assigned to me. I know there's no such thing as a status quo. I will build our business sustainably through passionate and loyal customers. It goes on and on. And so that first line caught me. So 2 things. One, I love for you to go deeper into Automattic's creed. And then secondarily, why all companies should write a creed.
I'll finish up the rest of it, actually. So
Good. Please do.
Passionate, loyal customers. I will never pass up an opportunity to help out a colleague. I don't remember the days before I knew everything. I am more motivated by impact than money. And I know that open source is one of the most powerful ideas of our generation. I will communicate as much as possible because it's the oxygen of a distributed company. I am in a marathon, not a sprint. And no matter how far away the goal is, the only way to get there is by putting one foot in front of another every day. Given time, there is no problem that's insurmountable. So the vast majority of that, and starting with the I will never start learning, these are I statements. I. And how this came about actually was, I think it was around 2010, so it was a while ago. Someone had CC'd me on an offer letter they had sent to someone we were hiring. And I was flabbergasted because we were sending like a docx file with bad typography. It's a bad Word doc, and it's just like legalese thing, and the salary's buried like 2 pages down. And like, I'm like, what? This is like one of the most important decisions someone's going to make in their life. And this is also for the company. One of the most sacred things we can do is hiring someone, bringing someone on the team, bringing them on the boat. And we're doing it through this like really crappy Word document. I was like, wow, what do we know about design? What do we know about like, how to make this better? So, I mean, some of it was just basic design stuff. Like, okay, let's fix up the font a little. Doesn't need to be Times New Roman. Let's have our brand. Let's put our logo on it. Then like, okay, let's take some key points out of it, like the stock option to the salary, and let's put that at the top. Like a little table. It's also in the legalese. And so we sort of got designing this, and I had just read a book, I think it was called Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. And he had talked about how it's sort of, he's a economist, and they do all these different tests. And one of the things was when they had people sign something saying they wouldn't cheat, they printed that and they had to sign it before turning in the test, they cheated less or something. But they'd been given an opportunity to cheat easily or something. But I forget the exact setup of the experiment. But this idea of like signing your name under something that you believe in, I was like, oh, that's great. And I think I was also reading some Seth Godin at the time. It was, as long as I get fired up and philosophical. And so I was like, all right, well, let's do a creed. What's something we can put above where you sign that will be a set of affirmative statements written in first person that if you don't agree with, I don't want you to join the company. And so that's what we did. So our offer letters now, had the nice stuff, then the legalese, nicely formatted, and then at the end, there'd be the creed, and then you signed underneath it. So
is the creed the same today as it was when you originally wrote it?
Disappointingly so, actually.
Oh, you
That's
want to update it?
when I first published it, I said this was like the 2011 version of the Creed. I imagined it would be much more of a living document. Now, I don't think the Creed is all inclusive. There's probably a lot of things that are important to us that aren't included. And there's been arguments about what to add to it and how to change it. And we still might in the future, but nothing has yet met the bar. Also, it needs to be like kind of catchy and punchy, you know? So
Hmm.
it can't just be like, we value all people equally, which we do. It's very important to us. That's core philosophy. Um, but also, I want the creed to be things that we might say that another company wouldn't say, you
Mm,
know? So of course, like all of those things like we have, and we try to live. But what's some things that make us different from any other company you might join? And maybe let's make that the creed. And so there's some things in there that other companies would say, but I don't know if like, Amazon would say I'm more motivated by impact than money, or that open source is the most powerful idea of the generation. I don't think Apple would say open source is the most powerful idea of the generation. So it's a good the Creed is actually open source itself. It's a, the Creative Commons license. So if you want to steal it, you can take it whole cloth, or you can, modify it or anything. You can have it. But it's interesting that it's not that many other companies that would fit really well. So
hmm.
maybe, but I would love if someone just took a sentence or two and made it one of the added it to their creed. It'd be kind of cool.
Why should all companies have a creed?
I think people need something to believe in, you know. I think people do their best work when they're surrounded by people who are also trying to do their best work, and when they're working for something for more than just a paycheck. You know, paycheck is a necessary condition, and it should be fair and competitive and everything. We all aspire to something higher in our souls, in our beings. So
Mm.
I think you have to articulate that. And it should be audacious. It should be big, and every successful organization has a version of this. Whether it's Google trying to organize the world's information. Wow, that's pretty ballsy. Like wow, all of the world's well, yeah, they were serious. That's why they started scanning every book. That's why they started like mapping every street. Like they're really serious about it. So it can be vague, it can be misused, but it can also be applied well and really drive an organization when you come up with a good one.
And I feel like too, I want to follow a leader who stands for something. And I want to know what they stand for. And if you stand for something, that means you don't try to stand for everything. And that's why it's good to have values, why it's good to have a creed. And I think it's good to document them and share them with other people, because if you try, again, to be for everything, you end up being for nothing. And from a leadership perspective, Matt, I feel like that's something you've done a really good job of documenting your thoughts and beliefs, so it actually acts probably as a great recruiting tool, because some will say, okay, that company's not for me. And that is good for you guys, right? That is great for you to know who is not for you as well as who could potentially be for you. So how is a creed, and how is you being a prolific writer and documenting your thoughts, giving speeches that are on, anybody can watch them, they're all over, the videos are all over the place. How has that helped you, you'd say, attracting talent as well as potentially keeping the people away that maybe wouldn't be a good fit?
It definitely does attract talent, and it also keeps you honest because, by the way,
Yeah.
I'm wrong all the time. And I'm sure that 10 years from now, there's some things I'll say in this interview that I would not no longer agree with. But one of the things that all companies like to say, we like to treat everyone equally and we value everyone and everything, blah, blah, blah. We did too. And at the early stages of Automattic, we did what almost every other company in the world does today, which is we paid people in different countries different wages for doing the same job. And guess what? Because we have a lot of principles and we talk about them and we have these discussions and everything, the people in those other countries started saying, wait, I'm doing the same work. What about same work, same pay? And that's an uncomfortable conversation. I've had that conversation with some other tech CEO, and it's like, okay, you wouldn't discriminate against the Indian person in your company, right? Why are you discriminating against all the people in India who work for your company? who are making 60% of what your California people do, something like that. And that's a very uncomfortable conversation because once you start to put it that way, people are like, oh, yep, that is not actually doesn't feel right. You can justify it. You can say cost of living. You can say like that's what they do. And you kind of have these veneers. But for us, we're not asking you to do your work from any particular place. You know,
Mhm.
I think cost of living is totally fair if I needed you to live in San Francisco and your job required you to be in San Francisco. Sure. I got to pay you some San Francisco local wages. But for us, being a fully distributed open source company, you can work wherever you want. So where you live is your choice. And the value you create for me is determined by what you're creating for our customers, not by where you live, where you rest your head every night. I don't even know or care. With some rare exceptions for like North Korea or some other things. So that's a good example of where like sometimes it can bite you. Because by the way, when this happened, and this was pointed out to me, I was like, oh yeah, yeah. I was like, huh. And the cognitive dissonance in my own head is it took me a while to come around to it. And it took the company a little while to true it up because you can't, well, we couldn't at least. We didn't have the margins and the finances to change that overnight. It wasn't like we could just flip a switch. But this is pointed out. I realized it. I realized the error of my ways. And we started moving towards that. And over the next couple of years, I can now say we are at global ranges for things. And not everyone likes that, particularly sometimes people in higher paid areas. But that's the market for what we do.
How many employees do you have now?
We're right around 1900.
1,900. Could you have imagined at the beginning of this thing of the crazy statistics? So WordPress, which is part of Automattic, is used. I read these stats. Update these if these are wrong. By 43.4% of all websites, including mine, learningleader.com. There are over 810 million WordPress websites. This again may be out of date. Like 1,900 employees. You're taking care of probably 1,900 families. That's insane to think about. Could you have imagined that at the beginning of this thing? Did you have that type of ambition? Did you want to do something to this magnitude and this scale?
Yeah, well, this is where it's also important to point out that my company Automattic is separate from WordPress.
Yeah.
So WordPress started before Automattic. It was an open source project, and it still is. And so Automattic contributes a great deal to it, or probably the largest contributor. However, don't own it. WordPress belongs just as much to you as it does to me. And starting off, I can say absolutely not. I could have never, and I honestly, if I don't think I would have started if I was trying to do, something as big as WordPress is today. Really, I was trying to solve a very small set of problems for myself and a few of my friends and sort of built up from there. And I think there's a law, the name is escaping me right now, but it's basically a complex system that works, always started as a simple system that worked. It's very hard, almost impossible to design a very, very complex thing from scratch de novo that works. So it's better to start from something simple, iterate, build, expands, and then you can get to something much bigger and more ambitious. Now we had pretty, I would say, that's the starting, but like a year or two in, we got delusions of grandeur. We're like, wow, let's take over the web. Let's be the operating system for the open internet. And that's when we started talking about the market share percentage of all websites. It was when we were 0.8% because Google did a survey of the web and they released some of the things they found when they crawled all the websites and from their engine. And they were like, we found this weird, it's obscure, but it's like we found this weird bit of protocol or something on 0.8% of the websites. And at the time, me and the other WordPress developers were like, whoa, like we're not 100% of that, but we're like 95% of the people who have that thing is a pingback header. And so it's like, well, so that means we might be like 0.7 or 0.8% of the internet right now. And that was just so shocking because to go from just a couple of websites or a couple hundred or watching download numbers to be like a percentage of the whole thing. It was pretty exciting. And so, yeah, we still talk about that number. The number, it can go up and down, and it's not a goal per se, but I think it is a trailing indicator of how well we're serving our community and our customers and our users and how well we're adapting WordPress to the times is whether we continue to earn that number.
You just mentioned the word goal. I'm fascinated by goals, goal setting, different types of goals. I found leaders are all over the spectrum when it comes to results based versus process based versus no goals versus a million goals. And you've written about this a bit. My goals in life are to democratize publishing, commerce, and messaging. What is your overall framework and philosophy around goal setting?
Huh. It's a good question. So some, like the democratize publishing, commerce, and messaging, are I think as life goals, and generational, and that it will continue long after I'm gone. I hope
Mhm.
people will carry that flame forward. So I'm holding some of those torches for now, but I won't. And it's really kind of a goal for humanity.
What does that mean, though? What does that mean to democratize publishing, commerce, and messaging?
It's a great question. So what it means to me is that we create a equality of opportunity and access to the core technology. So, meaning anyone all over the world, regardless of what language they speak, their economic ability, whatever ability they have, has access to the very best publishing software in the world, which is WordPress. You can use the same software that some of the largest websites in the world do. You can download that for free and run it on your iPhone. So, I mean, that's to me democratizing.
Mm.
And so that's how we use that word. And it gets used different ways. And how it applies to commerce is a little different how it applies to publishing and messaging. And our strategies there can vary. So, for example, for messaging, we're starting off with this thing called Beeper, which takes all the different messaging apps and brings them into one. Instead of opening 10 different apps to see our messages, you can see them all in one place, see all your unreads, all your archive. Think of a power user tool for messaging across Signal, Telegram, LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, Now that's kind of step one is to create this all-in-one thing. Step two is we hope to actually start routing some of those messages over open source networks. So if like you and I both are Beeper users, like we probably both have five things. We have WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, and Beeper. And but if we use Beeper, maybe you and I might start to route over the Matrix protocol when we message each other. Because what we care about is communicating with each other, not necessarily what's going underneath it. So it could be a way to sort of radically decentralize and open up communication platforms, which right now are really a choke point of humanity's freedom. So but we'll see. That's very, very long term. Like we still have to. Bieber has not that many users right now, so this doesn't really even get interesting till you get to hundreds of millions and billions of users.
Got you. So we see those goals, they're like life goals or goals that will live on beyond you. You want to be a force for good. You want to help us get in that direction. As a CEO, as a leader of a company, though, usually you stand up, maybe it's at the state of the word or maybe a different meeting that you would stand up and say we are headed in this direction or we want to achieve this. And I've worked for CEOs in the past who they clearly state revenue targets or whatever the numbers are, and then we're going to go get it. Do you do that type of thing? Do you set those types of goals for your company? Or if so, I'm curious to hear more about that strategy. Or if not, what do you do instead?
We do, and we
Yep.
have, and that's actually something I've been thinking a lot about recently because we had a tough couple of months, the past few months, with one of our products, and it missed a lot of its goals. And I was also thinking about the motivational impact of like saying we need to grow 30%. What does that mean? And I think those are really important to have from like a financial point of view and a forecasting and everything like that. So it's good business practice to do those. But it's probably more motivating if you're the crafts person, the person making or supporting the software or whatever the product is, to have something that feels a little bit more in your control.
Hmm.
So I have been thinking about how we make more goals that are we're going to be the best XYZ, or we're going to serve this many users in this language, or something like that feels a little more concrete than just a year-over-year percentage, which I personally like. Like
Yeah.
I have a business side as well, and I get it, and I love compounding and everything like that. But it can be a little abstract or feel like a bit of a treadmill to many people.
Yes. And what about for you personally? Do you set personal type goals, whether it's for health, fitness, family, fun, friends? Is that a thing that you do? I know you travel constantly, right? You just took a sabbatical, which I'm curious to learn more about. What about when it comes to how you are like leading yourself first, long before you're leading anybody else?
Yeah, I don't have anything too fancy there. Like I have little note cards I write things on.
Yeah.
I have I make one of our products is called Simple Notes. I make a new Simple Note every year that has sort of my goals for the year, and I also track some things I did or weddings I went to or things like that. I journal using our product Day One, which is this fully encrypted journaling system that I really love. So that's also really great for like seeing where you were this time last year, seeing how you're feeling, more of that introspective side of things. I find journaling very, very powerful tool for development and and progress, which is kind of what goal
Mhm.
setting is.
What type
And
of things are on those note cards or the simple note?
you know, I do make New Year's resolutions as well.
Oh,
And so I will set some goals there. Or sometimes they're silly, like once I want to run a 5K in 7 continents in 7 months was one I had a few years ago.
wow.
And so you gotta plan that out.
Yeah.
Antarctica is really hard to get to.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the anchor, right? And then you kind of like, oh, you kind of get South America for free on the way. How do you kind of map it out? Yeah, they can be silly, they can be big. I've published them before. One year I published at the beginning of the year like a bunch of acronyms that I knew the meaning of, but I was going to announce what they actually were at the end of the year. So it's kind of
Uh,
like sort of shooting my shot. These are the things I want to do this year, but I wasn't pre-announcing them. I was kind of going to be able to go back. So I think these are all different strategies. I've done lots of different ones. Um, I myself, I'm a little more jazz, a little more improvisational. I kind of change from year to year based on sort of what the biggest things that are going on or what the biggest priorities are, what my approach to tackling it might be.
hmm. Interesting. I remember seeing this years ago, and I've been wanting to ask you about it for years. I can think, I can wait, I can fast. It comes from Siddhartha about thinking, waiting, and fasting. If you can do these things, you can practically do anything. Of all the sayings in the world and all the quotes in the world, that's the one on your Twitter bio that you've had for a bit now. What is it about that one that made you leave it there after all these years? I can think, I can wait, I can fast.
Well, I mean, Herman Hesse, Siddhartha, it's one of the great books,
Yep.
you know, and so I feel, and it's short too, so I don't feel bad recommending it. It's not like I'm recommending you a 900-page thing. Like everyone should read that book, honestly. And so I think if you read the book, you'll see why I like the quote and why it inspires me. And I do those three things. I
How do you
actually
do
relooked.
those three? Yeah, how do you do those three things?
I did get into fasting, intermittent fasting, kind of early on, like the 2012 or 2013 or something. I had a buddy, actually John Vecchi of PopCap Games turned me onto it. And then I started experimenting with some longer fast, and you sort of get into this. Of course, nothing is new. It turns out every major religion has some form of fasting, some form of prayer, meditation, and humans have known this for a long time. But the core concept there, the mental model, which I think is good, is just cycling on and off, whatever it is that you're doing.
Hmm.
Even I take a lot of vitamins and supplements, but like, I try to stop taking them sometimes just to see, like, okay, go take a few weeks off just because. So that fasting for that is kind of a version of that. It's Peter Attia talks really well about some of the health benefits of it. And I encourage anyone interested in it to check that out. And there's a cool app called Zero, which also has like all the health information, how to do it well. And, you know, the one tip I'll give is have electrolytes. So sodium, magnesium, and potassium makes it so much easier. So just a little bit of that doesn't really break your fast. You put it in your water and you'll feel way better on days two, three, four. I've done 7 day fast, water fast.
Wow. How do you feel at the end of that?
Amazing, actually.
Really?
So yeah, so there's this weird thing where, first day you don't feel anything, just maybe feel hungry. Second day, for me, like kind of days two and three, you definitely feel lower energy, like your body's switching over, but then your body switches over to use burn fat, ketosis, burn ketones for energy. And then you'll get incredible mental clarity, incredible energy. You can work out, you can do a ton of stuff. Now, when you get into days six, seven, yeah, you are running a little bit lower. Also depends on your body fat composition, etc. But you actually have a lot of clarity, great sleep. It could be really, it's a nice thing to experiment with.
Hmm. Interesting. One of the other things about you, I've watched a number of your keynote speeches, and I can tell you work at it to do a really good job. And I think that's super important for a leader in any company, especially one if you're going to regularly communicate with your team. You're going to get up and take all of their time to be focused on you. I think you should be really good at it or do whatever you can to get good at it. And it's obvious that you have. What is your overall process to prepare for your keynotes to your team or just keynotes in general? And then
Ah,
how do you think about your message, the execution of that message, whether you use slides or not? I'm really
yeah.
into the communication with team, and I want to hear how you think about this.
Public speaking is a multiplier for anything else you do. So being able to communicate effectively, it's just a force multiplier for all your other skills. So it's really worth investing in. And as Toastmasters groups and other things. For me, part of the things that I was lucky with were I played saxophone from second grade. My dad played saxophone, so I wanted to be like him. So that's performing, things like that. My sister was in theater, so I did some theater stuff too. And those just were just good early experiences of standing in front of a group of other humans. And as an adult, I've invested a lot of time. I've taken courses, I've read books, I've done trainings. One of the hardest things to do is just watch yourself.
Hmm.
So like watch a recording of yourself. It's really painful because we don't sound to our ears like we do when we're talking. You notice all the ticks and all the different things you do, but it can be that's probably the best feedback loop because it's so painful. Practice. Now, I give a lot of different types of talks. I actually love sort of spontaneous Q&A like this is, especially after I've been speaking for so many years. At the beginning, I used to give the same talk all the time and got really good at that. But then they started posting the talks online. So I'm like, I can't give the same talk every time. I got to change it. So that's when I started doing a lot more improvisational Q&A, town halls. And I kind of like that anything could happen. Kind of like stand-up comedy. It's like you're kind of relying a little bit on your ability to respond or improvise. I have in recent years, and then when I talk about WordPress, that's also something that I'm just so deeply enmeshed in. So, you know, talking about something that you live and breathe every day, people are going to enjoy that because if they'll feel that you're passionate about it, they'll feel that you have knowledge about it and things like that. I have been more recently trying to hone a speech to sort of sell the idea of open source to a more mainstream audience and why open source should be like a defining philosophy in your life, uh, and how it can apply to all sorts of different walks of things like open source money is Bitcoin, open source knowledge is Wikipedia, open source software is WordPress and Chrome and Firefox and Linux and a million other things. So, but you kind of apply these principles to lots of walks of life, of transparency, version control, all this sort of stuff. And so I've been kind of working on a talk around that. And man, that's been the hardest thing.
Hmm. Why is
And
it
that
hard?
was one that I like made slides and rehearsed, and I think I've bombed it the couple times I've tried to give it. I would give myself probably a 4 or 5 on a scale of 10
Wait,
so
this is
far.
you said the phrase open source like as much as anything. throughout the course of our conversation. It's not a phrase that is talked about much, at least on this show. And now so I feel like it's deep within you. You believe it, but then you feel like the early iterations of this talk, you're not there yet. You don't feel it's good yet.
Yeah, maybe something I should do, thinking about it, is just find a great editor or a great storyteller, because I think part of it is crafting that narrative, the arc that kind of brings you along,
Yeah.
uh, challenges you, makes you re-examine the way you think about things. We've all seen that good TED talk or something like that that you're like, oh, well, you know, and there's kind of a formula to it. So
Sure, where you open with some sort of a story that makes me move to the edge of my seat and say, "Huh,
yeah,
what's this? What's this all about?" Because I am curious about. This is not again. This is not a phrase that's used in my life, or quite frankly, the people in my lives. It's just not. But I can tell it is for you. Could you even maybe do a little bit of that talk right now? What does open source mean to you? And if you had to describe it to somebody at a fourth grade level, what would you describe that as? And if there's a story, great. If not, that's fine too. But I'd like to hear
uh,
like, what is this and why are you so passionate about it?
it's funny because those are very different questions. What it means to me, how I described it in fourth grade, like the
Yeah.
so I talked a little bit about it earlier. So I think a good way. Oh, again, I'm working on this. But one thing I find that resonates is thinking of it like a Bill of Rights for software.
Okay.
So in America, you could talk about the Bill of Rights, where these inalienable rights that can't be taken from us as citizens. And normally, when you click through those giant EULAs, end user license agreements, no one reads them, all right? Actually, the WordPress.com one has an Easter egg in it, has a picture of some barbecue because no one reads them. So what are you agreeing to? What you're basically agreeing to is no rights at all. It's all about what the company has rights to. And open source tries to turn that on its head. It says, no, you actually have control, you have autonomy, you have ownership of this thing. It's often paired with a lot of transparency. One cool thing about Wikipedia or WordPress is you can go to any article and see its history, every single change back to when it was a single sentence. And every file in WordPress, you can see back to when it was a first committed or a single line. It's kind of beautiful. And the talk, I try to make an analogy of that source code as well to like our DNA, which is kind of the source code for humanity. Open source is a lot about sharing. And so this idea can become more valuable the more people get involved with it. There's actually value in its abundance, not in its scarcity. So it's just like any good idea, it has a mimetic value. So those are some of the core principles. And often, if I were talking to someone, I'd try to find something in their life, like the Wikipedia, like BitTorrent, like Bitcoin, whatever it might be that they might use. They might not even know is open source. Or if I were talking to a business person, I might say like, 95% of software uses open source libraries now. It's basically everything uses some of these libraries. And why aren't you? Or people would say open source is insecure. And so we say, well, WordPress runs the whitehouse.gov. You can imagine that that's like it's attacked quite a bit by some of the best enemies in the world. So how can it be secure, but you say open source can't be secure? So it's just different kind of, it depends on the context. Yeah.
Gotcha. Shifting a little bit to the people that you intentionally surround yourself with. Again, you've built this amazing business, you've grown a lot, and I don't think it's hard to do that on your own. Most of us are better when we're collaborating, when we're surrounded by really good people. I'm curious, Matt, when you're looking at hiring,
Uh,
specifically for a leadership role. Okay, for a leadership role. I'm not sure how involved you are in it now or not, but at some point you had to be. But when you're hiring for a leadership role, there are table stakes of, yeah, they got to be able to do this function or they have to be able to do this. I understand that part of it. But beyond that, what are some of the must have qualities that you want in a person to be a leader at your company?
yeah, and I think it's really important to stay involved with hiring
Yep.
through the lifetime of your company.
Yep.
I personally did the final interview for the first 1,000 hires. Then I became a
Wow.
boss. We started hiring, growing really fast. I think one year we hired like 700 people. So we had to slow that down. But there's many ways to go for it. I think it's really great to do some sort of skill test. And actually, at Automattic, we do a trial project where we actually just do, and we'll pay you at a flat rate, 25 bucks an hour, to actually do the work that you're going to do as the job. And that was partly because, all these interview questions didn't seem to have a good correlation to who actually worked out. Some people are terrible at interviewing and really great at the job. Some people are great at interviewing, not that good at the job. And that makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Then somewhere I came across these four qualities that you can't really train. So I try to look for in everyone, and that's work ethic, taste, integrity, and curiosity. So I try to surround myself or work with people who have those four things because it's not something I'm going to be able to teach you if you didn't kind of come in the door with that.
Can you say
Now,
this
you
again?
can't call work ethic, taste, integrity, and curiosity.
How do you identify that through the interview process?
Yeah. So it's not by saying, hey, do you have good work ethic or not? Or these are the four things I think are important. Are you good at them? And that would
Yes.
obviously do
Yeah.
a one kind of answer. So you look for it without asking the question at all. For taste, that to me is not about one particular aesthetic or something. It's kind of how it's kind of like conscientiousness or attention to detail and how people do everything they do, So if they, I don't care if your resume was a text file, but was a well-formatted text file. You don't have to like the same music as me, but do you have a good reason why you like some music or why you don't like music? Or, it's kind of like it's very broad. It's just kind of a thoughtfulness for choices. How do you look for the other things? Curiosity. I look for how people learn or how they approach learning. Sometimes ask questions around like what they read or how they like to learn. Integrity is probably a tough one. I don't know. I guess for that, you just maybe tenure is a good indicator. Okay, but that's not necessarily. So that's probably the one that really you learn over time. But as the longer you work with someone, the more
For
you'll
for
have a sense.
leaders, for leaders, are you trying hard to promote from within? Is that part of your model? Do you want to just keep because that helps with certainly with integrity, and you could also get an
Yeah.
understanding of their work ethic if they've been with you for a while and you just keep lifting up. Is that how you try to do it?
Yeah, and I've been very fortunate that I've had, I can count on less than one hand the number of integrity issues we've had at the company.
Wow.
Um, I think most people are good and you treat them well, they'll do so in return.
Yeah.
And we have kind of a high transparency, high trust organization. So if you screw up, that's okay. Just say it. Or if you did something really, really, really wrong, you might not be fired for that if you actually said it. In fact, it might be one of those things where we're like, wow, this person's really trustworthy or someone we want to invest in the long term. You asked, do we promote or hire externally? We do a mix of both. I find at our company, and I benchmark other companies, so we're not uniquely bad at this, but of external senior hires, more than half don't work out.
Hmm.
And by workout, I mean they're a decade later. So that's a high bar, you know. But I think that's pretty consistent. It can be hard sometimes for someone might be very, very good, but in a different type of organization or with a
Mhm.
different type of culture or something like that. So I think that's okay. You just have to kind of build in that there's going to be maybe that you're not going to bat 1,000 there. Even in
Yeah.
hiring, I would say batting 300 is really good. Then for promotions, we do that. And the key thing there is we also try to get people really great coaching and exposure to the outside world to make sure that they are not just being locally good, but actually globally good at whatever role they're trying to fill.
Do you hire them coaches or you have a stable of coaches that are on call to help your people
Yeah, so we now have a pretty extensive coaching program, and it started
that you employ or you hire outside of your company?
mostly outside, mostly contractors. That what's nice about it is they're outside the reporting structure and outside of Automatic. So it's someone that will pay a lot of money that's just for you. It's not your boss. It's not your, colleague. It's not anyone like that. And we have a stable of people we know are good and a selection process and different things. So that they're familiar with the company pretty well at this point. But we have dozens now. And this started just I was getting coaching. I was like, oh, we should expand this to more executives. I was like, well, if it's good for executives, it's going to be good for everyone. So we opened it up to the whole company at different levels. So I think anyone in the company can get up to 10 hours of coaching per year.
Wow.
Um, and good coaches are expensive. So that actually is a pretty expensive benefit. It's probably one of the best things we offer, actually. And
Hmm.
I'm surprised more people don't take advantage of it.
You being super accomplished, but you're also always a learner. So, how did a coach help you improve? Do you remember specifically what you did or the questions they asked you or the process that you went through that you thought, "Yeah, this is helping me. This is needed. Even though I'm super accomplished, super smart dude, this has helped." What happened?
Actually, for a long, long time, I didn't work with one coach, but I got lots of coaching. So I'd go to like lots of specialists for different things, like public speaking or something like that, or go to workshops and just sign up for stuff, writing courses. So it might be things that aren't necessarily even business related, but I just take a workshop around it. So I did later find, actually, relatively like 4 years ago, a more one-on-one coach. And that's pretty awesome because then that's someone who you can have a longer term relationship with that really gets to know your whole life
Hmm.
and the more intricacies of the business or something like that. And what's one of the most valuable things they can do is just call you out and say, hey, 6 months ago you were saying XYZ. Today you're saying XYZ. Like, what changed? Or like, they kind of provide that mirror. I think a lot of the best coaches also don't come to you with answers. They come to you with questions. They're really trying to reflect this idea that you have the answers, but maybe you're not looking at it in the right way or not seeing it. So that's one version of it.
It's like a good mentor. The best mentors I've ever had, they cared, they listened, and they asked me questions so that I would have ownership over the answer, not them. And when you
Huh.
have ownership over the answer, you're more inclined to stick to it. You're more inclined to follow through, to hold yourself accountable and be held accountable than if I'm just doing what you told me to do. And I think it's a good lesson for leaders for us as now leading others is how do we help the people we're leading take more ownership over their decisions, over their actions, over what they're doing? Because if so, they're going to be more inclined to follow through and keep at it, even when it gets really hard. And so that's what I think a good coach is really good at is you got to be curious. I think you have to be a good listener and you do have to be very competent and know your stuff. But there's like so many different elements to coaching that's why I'm fascinated by it. And I think it's really cool that you offer that up to your people as well. I know we're getting close to our time, Matt, but I'm curious because of all the amazing things that you've accomplished, there are endless opportunities for you to be surrounded by the best of the best in the world. They're all coming to you, right? Some of the leaders who have sustained excellence as much or more than anybody in the world, they want to be in your orbit. And so I share that because now you've had exposure to excellent leadership. I'm curious from your perspective, when you think about all of those people in your life, I know this is a big question, but when you think about all of them, what have you found to be some of the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time?
That's a good question. I think you need to find optimism even in the really dark times. That's really important. I tend to gravitate towards leaders that are player coaches. So they they aren't scared to get their hands dirty, do the work, have a background in it. Customer support, very, very essential to my philosophy and a lot of the leaders I look up to. I think hiring is really, really key and retention. They're kind of two sides of the same coin. So I try to spend a third of my time on the people side of things. That's probably not comprehensive, but if you get those four things right, I think that you'll uh it covers a lot of what you can get a lot of other stuff wrong. If you get the people right, you can be motivating, have a vision. I guess also just realizing that you're going to be wrong a lot. Something I've learned, and I'm still learning, is I think particularly because I was so young when I started, I felt like I could never show any weakness or admit I screwed up because then they'd hire a real CEO,
Mhm.
not this 20-year-old kid or something. But then that's fundamentally inauthentic, and it's actually can be very, very powerful sometimes. Really talk about a struggle or screw up or just own things. And so that I think is counterintuitive. It's not like what we go to naturally, but it can be a really, really effective leadership technique
You have time for one more?
or leadership practice. I don't want to use the
Yeah,
word technique, practice.
practice. I got you. You have time for one more?
Sure.
If you were asked to give a commencement speech to some graduating college students, what are a piece or two of the message you would deliver them from an advice perspective? I know not everybody loves giving advice, but you were asked to give this commencement speech. They want to hear from you. They want your advice. What is a thing or
Yeah.
two that you would share with that group of students that are now done technically with their undergraduate degree?
Well, probably a lot of stuff we talked about already. So
Yep.
I'll include that, but I'll add one thing that I'll steal from Tyler Cohen, since we're running low on time. The one thing I really like this is he talks about how encouraging others to be more ambitious
Yes.
is one of the best things you can do with your time. And I think that's really cool. And it's not hard and it works. So I
Yep.
definitely am very fortunate that I've had people encourage me to be more ambitious through my career. So
I love that. Tyler said that, I know he wrote a post about it, but the high return activity of raising others' aspirations at critical moments in time, you can raise the aspirations of other people significantly simply by suggesting they do something better or more ambitious than what they may have in mind. In his case, he'll tell someone, skip the MBA, just go get your PhD. It costs you relatively little to do this, but the benefit to them and to the broader world may be enormous. Love that advice as well, Matt. And I love the fact that we got to do this. I've thought about this for almost 10 years. And so now it is really cool. And I've been emailing random emails for the past decade. So it's amazing to now finally get a chance to have this conversation. I'm very appreciative of you, your work, your willingness to share it publicly, videos, writing, all of it. It's amazing, man. And I would love to continue our dialogue as we both progress.
thank you so much. Really enjoyed this conversation and keep up the great work.
Thank you. Appreciate it, man.